Who owns assets? Well, rich people. Poor people they don't own a home. They probably don't own a car. They don't have any stocks for sure. But rich people do. If you look at just the billionaires in the United States, before COVID, billionaires' wealth was 14.2% of GDP. Now, what is it? Today, it's 21.2% of GDP. I think we will see a slowdown in the U.S. economy and probably have a recession next year. I think a big factor in the election was the resentment of people with lower incomes. They intuitively knew that the rich were becoming very rich. And they were becoming, in fact, once you adjust for inflation, they were becoming even poorer. So I think this was the secret behind the election. So what happened with the United States when COVID hit in early 2020, the Federal Reserve increased the money supply dramatically. And of course, as night follows day, asset prices went up. And that means real estate went up, land went up, the stock market went a huge increase in the stock market. Now, who owns assets? Well, rich people. Poor people don't own a home, probably. They probably don't own a car. They don't have any stocks for sure. But rich people do. So if you look at just the billionaires in the United States, I've just done this calculation a few weeks ago. And before COVID hit, in February of 2020, billionaires' wealth as a percent of GDP was 14.2% of GDP. Now, what is it? Today, it's 21.2% of GDP. The billionaires, they became super rich because of this expansion in the money supply. And what about the little guy who owned no assets? He was crushed. To view the economy, and you have to have a model for what we call national income determination. The national income is what? Well, nominal national income is the real growth and the inflation number. You will get nominal GDP. That's national income. What's going to happen with nominal GDP? The most reliable model for doing that is what they call a quantity theory of money. Money is the fuel for the economy. The transmission mechanism goes this way. If you change the money supply with a lag, you get changes in asset prices. So if you increase the money supply significantly, asset prices, the stock market goes up, housing prices go up, land prices go up, automobiles, all assets go up. And then with a little further lag, the real economy starts going faster and faster. And then the last thing, you'll increase or decrease inflation. So money supply has contracted in the United States. Money supply now is the stock of money measured by M2 is lower than it was in July of 2022. And that's only happened 4 times in the United States since the Federal Reserve, our central bank, was established in 1913. And every one of those contractions has been followed. The transmission, you see, comes. You contract the money supply, and of course, the economy slows down and inflation slows down. And that's why I think we will see a slowdown in the U.S. economy and probably have a recession next year. You've got to keep a constant rate of growth in the money supply. That's one big step. Why have we the generation of more income inequality since COVID than in any other period in the United States? It's because the money supply increased more than it ever has in the United States. And asset prices went up as a result of that. So the rich got rich, even more wealthy. That was because of the monetary policy in the United States. If you look at the statistics, the inequality that I'm talking about was a huge change. But besides that, when the money supply is growing kind of constant, nothing changes much. In terms of income distribution, I mean. Now, that this also relates to China, by the way, because what's going on in China right now is very interesting to me as a monetary economist, because we have the current stimulus program in China. Now, China has just exactly the opposite problem. The money supply is simply not growing fast enough. And of course, that's why you have, what's the inflation? It's almost non-existent, 0.2%, 0.2% per year is the inflation in China. And the target is 3%, the inflation target. So inflation rate in China is way below the target. And the only way to get that up is to increase the money supply, rate of growth in the money supply. The money supply has to be growing Hanke's golden growth rate of about 11%. Now, I figure that out by using the quantity theory of money and what they call the equation of exchange, MV equals PY. And right now, the money supply is only growing at 7.45%. About 7.5% year over year is a percentage rate of growth in the money supply measured by M2 in China, and it should be growing almost double that. What about the United States? What's Hanke's golden growth rate in the United States? The inflation target is 2%. It's a little lower, 1 percentage point lower than China's, but the golden growth rate is only about 6%. It's 5 percentage points lower than it is in China. Not 1, but it's 5. Now, why is that? Well, China is a developing economy yet. China is still, it's a huge country, as you know, but the per capita income still isn't that high. It's developing. And that means that the financialization, the using of money and finance and banking, it's still spreading and growing pretty fast in China. So the demand for RMB, it's higher than the demand for US dollars. And it's growing faster. That's why the golden growth rate is 11% in China, and it's only 6% in the United States. Let me give you some numbers to allow you to understand what's going on in China. In the great financial crisis, what China did, China accelerated the money supply, and that was in November of 2008, the money supply in China was growing at 15% per year. And in November of 2009, a year later, it was growing at 30%. So they accelerated, huge acceleration in the money supply. And what happened? If you look at, again, with the transmission mechanism and the lag, in July of 2009, actually the consumer price index was negative in China. It was minus 1.8. By July of 2011, inflation was up to 6.5%. What happened to real GDP? Fourth quarter of 2008, it was 7.1% per year. Fourth quarter of 2009, it was 11.9%. Fourth quarter of 2010, it was 9.9%. Real growth in China. So in the great financial crisis, the Chinese did exactly the right thing. They accelerated the money supply, and that accelerated the real economy. From what I can understand, what's going on, the increase in the money supply is not going to go into real estate. Some might. The real estate slump might end, shall we say. But I wouldn't anticipate that you'd have a real estate boom again in China. The loans that would be made by banks would be going into other activities, but not so much real estate.